So good morning to all of you, and good morning to my fellow colleagues in the press. A few remarks. I thank all the members of Congress, the senators who are here with us, and I have asked Carlos Jimenez and Mario Diaz-Balart to be next to me because the words that I'm going to be speaking echo what they're feeling. And then I'm going to give the opportunity to the senators and the rest of the members of Congress to speak to you or give you some sound bites. As you know, I'm Maria Salazar. I'm the representative of District Number 27 in South Florida, the heart of the Cuban exile community in the United States, the city of Miami. And as I stand here today, the Cuban people are crying for freedom. Yesterday, as you know, the whole world watched as hundreds of Cuban dissidents were silenced by the regime. A few weeks ago, Cuba's brave freedom fighters planned to go back to the streets and shout libertad, or liberty, once again. They encountered threats, kidnappings, and abuse. And yesterday, when the time came, they were muzzled once again. Junior Garcia, for example, the brave leader of this movement, has been under siege in his own home for days. They have covered his windows with enormous flags to cloak him in darkness and force him back into submission. For 6 decades, 62 years, this murderous regime has put a stranglehold on the Cuban people, but now the Cubans are saying enough. That's why every opposition leader right now is under house arrest. And dozens of teenagers who dared on July 11th to demand liberty on the streets of Havana are condemned to rot in a Cuban prison just for screaming liberty. That's why the repressive apparatus shuts down internet access every time, so the world won't see what they're doing to their own people. For months, the Cuban people have done their part. Now we, the United States, we must do ours. This country is the shining light of democracy in a sea of darkness that engulfs the Cubans for 60 years. But when they took to the streets in July, as I said, the Biden administration was all talk and no action. As the Congresswoman of the city of Miami, as I said, the heart of the Cuban exile community, the city of Miami, I am asking the White House once again, one thing and only one thing. Turn on the internet. Put your money where your mouth is. The technology we know is out there. Do the due diligence. Let's send a clear message to the Cubans that they are not alone. And it's not only Cuba. It's Venezuela. It's Nicaragua. It's Afghanistan. We're sending the wrong message to dictators around the world that we, the United States, the beacon of hope, is missing in action. I call once again on this administration to work with the technology companies to provide internet to Cuba. There are no excuses. Cuba will be free soon. We know that. The Castro's days are numbered, and they know it. The regime knows that their days are numbered. The Cuban people are on the right side of history. The United States needs to be with them. Now it's up to the Biden administration to do so. Thank you. Now some remarks en español. Ustedes saben que yo soy la representante de la ciudad de Miami, que es el corazón del exilio cubano en los Estados Unidos. Y estamos aquí para denunciar lo que el régimen cubano hizo ayer de meter a todo el mundo que quería salir a las calles presos. Todos están presos, pero nosotros estamos aquí ayudando y soportando y dándole énfasis y dándole una voz de esperanza a esos cubanos que están presos, que no están solos. Por eso le estamos pidiendo a la administración del presidente Biden una vez más, y yo lo he hecho muchas veces, que prenda el internet, que llame a las compañías que tienen la tecnología de hacer que el internet se pueda subir en Cuba cuando ETETSA lo tumbe. Por eso le estoy pidiendo ahora una vez más a la administración del presidente Biden que haga el due diligence, que haga lo que tiene que hacer y que provee conectividad a los cubanos. Eso es lo único que necesitamos y los cubanos harán el resto. Los cubanos están del lado correcto de la historia. Ahora depende que esta administración esté con los cubanos del lado correcto de la historia. Thank you. Now I'm going to let Senator Rubio, please, to mention a few words. Thank you.
Thank you all for covering this today. Thank you, Congresswoman Salazar, for calling this, and all of you for being here today. I think what's most interesting, this is a movement inside Cuba that's led by young intellectuals, artists. These are not people that were political activists. It's a very young generation who's demanding a better life. And the entire power of the regime, the military, the party apparatus, the government, everything, the entire power of that regime was unleashed to prevent people from walking in the street and shouting slogans. To think about that for a moment. They unwittingly, in so doing, did two things. The first is they created a powerful new symbol of resistance. I think this only adds to the movement. They actually gave, for a week and a half, free publicity to artists and intellectuals that may not have been widely known throughout the island as leaders of this movement that now are well known within the island. The second thing is they revealed who they really are. I, for the life of me, don't understand how any of these countries that continue to defend Cuba in international forums can do so. But in the way they reacted towards this, from the mobs that they unleashed on people's homes to flags covering windows, they reveal who they are. They prove those protesting against them correct. And so I hope this administration will use the power and the influence of this government that we have at every international forum to ask countries around the world, how can you continue to align with this? How can you continue to support and defend this regime, this government, and its actions? Now, it's already been mentioned about the internet. Look, the technology to do it exists. It's not easy, but it can be done, especially in key moments in which we know the internet's going to be shut down. It's a matter of will and desire. And I don't expect a lot, frankly, when the person in charge of the Cuba portfolio in the State Department just a year and a half ago was organizing trips for members of Congress to meet with the regime. I don't expect a lot when the people at the National Security Council who are involved in the Cuba portfolio are people who are deeply involved in negotiating a failed deal with the regime. Fact of the matter is, the people in charge of this on an hourly basis in this administration are not on the side of what we're asking for. What they want is an understanding and an agreement with this evil regime. So I'm not expecting a lot unless the president himself makes it a priority, which so far he has not. Brevemente en español, mis palabras son que esto es un movimiento de intelectuales y artistas, jóvenes, una generación esperando y exigiendo una vida mejor, libertad de expresión, libertad política. Y la reacción del gobierno del régimen fue utilizar todo el poder del gobierno, del partido, de los militares, para oprimir, para prevenir. Y en haciendo eso han hecho dos cosas, le han dado fuerza a este movimiento, publicidad a este movimiento. Los medios de comunicación oficiales se pasaron 2 semanas condenando esto y le han dado, ahora muchos en Cuba conocen lo que no conocían antes, pero también han sido desescarados. Ahora se ven claramente quiénes son la naturaleza y quiénes son en este régimen. Y el mundo entero lo ha visto. Y la pregunta mía es cómo estos países siguen, estos países que siempre están defendiendo a Cuba en los foros internacionales, cómo pueden seguir del lado de ellos. Y le pido a esta administración que lo haga prioridad, una prioridad diplomática de presionar a estos países y preguntarle claramente cómo ustedes siguen defendiendo ese régimen que actúa de esta manera. Y segundo, le diré que ya se ha hablado, la congresista Salas ya lo mencionó, de la internet. Es posible, se puede hacer, especialmente en momentos clave en que sabe que vienen protestas, en momentos claves políticos, se puede hacer, pero no es prioridad. Porque la persona que está encargado del tema de Cuba en el Departamento de Estado es una persona que hace 1 año y medio estaba coordinando viajes para congresistas a reunirse en Cuba, en La Habana, con líderes de este régimen. Y también la persona del Consejo de Seguridad Nacional encargado del tema de Cuba. Es alguien que participó activamente y apoya todavía el arreglo que se hizo bajo Obama con el gobierno de Castro. Así que, en fin, les pido, no espero mucho de esta administración si el presidente Biden no convierte el tema de Cuba en una prioridad personal. And now let me recognize my colleague, Senator Scott.
All right, thanks everybody for being here today. So here's what we've got. We've got the Cuban people standing up. What should be happening is the United States should be their partner and stand up for freedom and democracy. The international community should show up. I mean, they like democracy in Europe. Why don't they support democracy in Cuba? Why don't they care about the Cuban people? The point should be that we all stand together for democracy and freedom for the Cuban people. So what we've got now is the regime of Diaz-Canel and Castro. They're kidnapping activists, leaders from UNPACO, the San Isidro movement, ladies in white. They're attacking and killing peaceful protesters. We should be talking about this every day. It should be on television every day. If we had a president that cared about this, it would be on television. We all would know about it. Every American would know about it. We've got 1,200 Cubans that have been unjustly arrested by the illegitimate Castro regime. This has to stop. Marco Rubio and I have introduced 2 bills, Democracia Act, which is going to implement severe sanctions about anybody that's helping the Castro regime, and the Patria Vida Act to ensure those fighting for freedom and democracy have internet access. They can do it. The State Department told me that they could do it and they would work on it back in July. They have done absolutely nothing. In contrast, I have 3 things that the Biden administration should do. 1, denounce the unlawful detentions of peaceful protesters in Cuba today. Show up, do your job. The White House has the biggest pulpit in this country, in the world. Do something with it. shut down the illegitimate Cuban embassy. Why do we have a Cuban embassy right here in Washington, D.C.? It doesn't belong here. And third, we have the technology. Do your job. Get the internet back on. This should happen. We have to stand with the Cuban people. We have to stand with Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua. Why wouldn't we? El pueblo de Cuba no están solos. Estoy con ustedes en esta lucha. La Florida está con ustedes en esta lucha. Los Estados Unidos, sin Joe Biden, están con ustedes en esta lucha. La libertad de Cuba está más cerca que nunca y no vamos a parar hasta que veamos un nuevo día de libertad, democracia y patria y vida in Cuba. Now I'm going to introduce Mario. So when I got elected back in 2010, Mario was one of the individuals, along with his brother and Ileana, that was unbelievable support in why we did well with the Cuban vote. And I want to thank Mario for what he's done and what he does to fight for freedom every day.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you.
Indeed, yes.
Good morning. Let me first, by the way, start by, well, Maria Elvira, thank you for bringing us together.
Sure.
But let me start by thanking all the members of the press.
Yes.
There's been a change, by the way. You know, all the reports before the Cubans hit the street were about quaint cars. And very few reports about human rights violations, about political prisoners. But I want to thank the members of the press because that's starting to change. The reality of the Orwellian situation that the Cubans are experiencing is starting to be reported by the press in the United States and by the press internationally. And so I'm grateful for all of you who are here today and members of the press. I don't want to repeat what's already been said. This administration, this president, could immediately, if he wants to, have a situation where the Cuban people can communicate among themselves via a type of internet. That the private sector can do it with the help of the administration, and the administration, the government, the U.S. government, could do it unilaterally, immediately. All that is required is for the President of the United States to say, let's do it. And yet, he has refused to even do that. Number two, you've heard, you know, it's about time that the United States, that President Biden used the full force of the diplomatic force of the United States to start shaming and pressuring countries that are helping the regime, while that regime is imprisoning and murdering people as we speak, for the simple fact that they want freedom and they're asking for their freedom. Lastly, not only is President Biden missing in action, but look at what he's actually done. If you look at deeds, not words. In this moment, please keep in mind that in this moment, the Democratic leadership in Congress and the President both are pushing to reduce funding for broadcasting into Cuba. So no efforts to help the Cubans communicate, and then trying to cut the funds for broadcasting into Cuba. That is the shameful record of this president and this administration. So we are respectfully but aggressively asking this president to stand on the right side of history, to stand on principle, that principle of freedom, and stand with the Cuban people, something that as of now he's refused to do. Muy brevemente, primero, gracias María Elvira Salazar por tu liderazgo y por convocarnos esta mañana, y gracias a mis colegas y gracias a los miembros de la prensa. Porque estamos viendo que tradicionalmente en los Estados Unidos lo único que se veía en la prensa sobre Cuba eran los automóviles antiguos y que, mira qué bonito, qué agradable los automóviles antiguos. Y muy pocos reportajes sobre el sufrimiento, la realidad del pueblo cubano. Pero eso está cambiando en la prensa norteamericana y en la prensa mundial. Y por eso les doy las gracias a los miembros de la prensa por estar aquí y por fin estar cubriendo la realidad que está sucediendo dentro de la isla. Este presidente hasta ahora ha estado totalmente ausente. Pero peor que estado ausente, parece haciendo todo lo posible para ayudar al régimen de Castro. En estos momentos, cuando los cubanos lo que quieren es poder salir a la calle y le hace falta comunicación, el presidente Biden pudiese en 24 horas establecer una red para que los cubanos se puedan comunicar entre ellos. Pero ha rehusado hacerlo. Y no solamente ha rehusado hacer eso, pero miren lo que está haciendo, no lo que dice. Está recomendando, y el liderazgo demócrata lo está apoyando en esto, recomendando la reducción de los fondos para la comunicación dentro de la isla, para la radio que llega a la isla. Eso es lo que está haciendo el presidente Biden en estos momentos. No, este no es el momento de ayudar al régimen, presidente Biden. Este es el momento de estar con el pueblo de Cuba, igual con el valiente pueblo de Venezuela y el valiente pueblo de Nicaragua. Le urgimos, le pedimos a este presidente que se una a la causa de la libertad, que se una a estos pueblos que están luchando por su libertad y que se ponga de pie por esa causa, una causa noble, que se ponga en el lado correcto de la historia. Hasta ahora, el presidente Biden o está ausente o peor, está ayudando a los tiranos que están haciendo tanto daño en Cuba y en otros países de nuestro hemisferio. Let me now introduce a person who, by the way, back home needs no introduction. He's been a leader in our community. He's been a leader on the freedom issue, even though he was a local official. And now he's brought his leadership here, and he's a dear friend, a person that I rely on immensely, and that is Congressman Carlos Jimenez.
Thank you, Mario, and again, thank the Senator Maria for putting this together, the senators for being here, and also all my colleagues in Congress. Today, we stand here in strong support of the freedom fighters in Cuba and against communism. The very system of social, political, and economic oppression has brought misery, poverty, and death to the Cuban people. Communism indeed does make everybody equal. It makes them equally miserable. As the struggle of the Cuban people continues, I led several of my colleagues, many standing here with me today, in demanding Secretary Blinken take decisive measures in support of the Cuban protesters. The time for roundtable discussions and empty words are over. It's time for President Biden and Secretary Blinken to grow a spine and keep their commitment to freedom and democracy. Mr. President, Mr. Secretary, here's how you can do it. Condemn the communist Cuban regime for their decades of oppression. Condemn the communist Cuban regime for any acts of violence against protesters, which we've already seen. Condemn the evils of communism that has led to the misery, the poverty, the stifled basic and fundamental human rights. Support the mission of the protesters in Cuba, which includes establishing free and democratic elections, release of all political prisoners, and the establishment of a free and independent press. Commit the United States to continuing the policy of maximum pressure and applying more pressure to the communist illegitimate Cuban regime until fundamental democratic reforms take hold. Establish by any means necessary internet connection and technology. And as my colleagues have previously stated, that's of vital importance for the people of the Cuban people to be able to communicate with themselves, and just as important, for them to be able to communicate with the outside world, what's actually happening in Cuba, their daily lives, the oppression of the Cuban people by their own government. On a personal note, I emigrated to this country with my family when I was a young boy, just 6 years old. I lived through the indoctrination curriculum in elementary school. I witnessed my birth country crumble to the woes of communism. Luckily, my family and I had the opportunity to immigrate to this great country. You know, in just one generation, my family went from Cuba to Congress. I believe with all my heart and soul that in no other country in the world is that achievement possible. For that reason, I will always stand firmly on the side of those who yearn for freedom and democracy. It's time for Biden and Blinken to be on the side of those who yearn for freedom too. And I ask for them, please, please support the freedom fighters in Cuba, and urge their unwavering support of freedom and democracy, not only in Cuba, but in Venezuela and Nicaragua and all parts of the world, especially in our own hemisphere. And to the Cuban people, our message is we stand with you, we will always stand with you, and we won't give up until one day we see a free Cuba. Patria vida. Thank you. And now I want to introduce the House Minority Whip, Steve Scalise.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here today, standing with my colleagues, especially those who, in the case of Carlos Jimenez, fled Cuba himself, Mario Diaz-Balart, Maria Elvira Salazar, whose families that directly experienced the oppression of socialism in Cuba. And we stand with those people in Cuba who yearn for freedom. One of the great hallmarks of America is that we don't only hold our pride and freedom to ourselves, we share it with the world. We share it with people anywhere around the world. whether they're living in a free nation today or whether they're living under oppression and socialism, and they want freedom. That Statue of Freedom that stands right behind us is a beacon of hope for everyone around the world who believes in freedom. And in many nations like Cuba, that freedom's being denied. And when they seek it in the streets, we need to be there with them. They speak firsthand about what they've seen from the oppression and the ills of socialism. It's about government control. It's about government taking away the freedoms of individuals and having to rely on the government. One of the dangers we see right here this week is there is a march towards socialism by the Biden agenda, by what Speaker Pelosi is bringing on the floor, and we reject that too. We're calling on President Biden to stand with people who are seeking freedom all around the world. Let's make sure here we don't let America become a socialist nation as they contemplate trillions of dollars in new spending on more socialist-style programs. Big government socialism has failed everywhere it's been tried. We cannot let it come to this great nation. We are proud to stand with the people of Cuba, all of those who seek freedom in Cuba and all around the world. Thank you for putting this together.
Thank you, Leader. Thank you, Leader Scalise, for being with us. And now I want to acknowledge Representative Michael Waltz.
I'll be brief. Thank you so much. Look, here's the bottom line. Communism kills. Communism has killed more people throughout world history than any other ideology in world history. Communism is killing today in China. It's killing today in Russia. It's killing today in Venezuela. It's killing today in Nicaragua. It's killing today in Cuba. It kills. So we see all of those countries now lining up behind this regime. These murderous dictatorships. President Biden says America's back, says he wants to lead with diplomacy. Where is his diplomacy? Where is his leadership in the Organization of American States? Where is his leadership in the United Nations? Where is his leadership in the Western Hemisphere? Is he even planning to make a visit to South or Central America anytime soon? Heck, I'll take one to just Miami. How about that? Look, come down to Florida, come down and face the Cuban American population, hear their stories, hear from their representatives. And at the end of the day, you know, action has consequences. Well, when you're a president of the United States, inaction has even bigger consequences. And President Biden's inaction when it comes to this oppressive regime is killing people, is allowing them to be imprisoned, to be silenced, and to be killed. And that blood is on his hands, and we will hold him accountable for it. Thank you, and I yield to Ms. Granger.
Thank you. It's really an honor to be here in solidarity with the courageous people of Cuba. As a member of Leader McCarthy's Cuba advisory team, I've been closely following events at this island. Yesterday, Cubans took to the streets to demand a better life. They demanded an end to the tyranny and repression from the Communist Party at the people's expense. They demanded freedom. Their actions were peaceful, but the government's response was not. Instead of being heard by the regime, they were suppressed and detained. Sadly, it's not the first or the last time we will be witnessing this oppression. While the Cuban people demonstrate in historic numbers against communist tyranny and corruption, we in the United States must stand behind them. As ranking member of the Appropriations Committee, I've supported critical programs to encourage democracy in Cuba and ensure Cubans have access to the unbiased, objective news and information. The programs must be successfully and sufficiently funded. They must also be part of a comprehensive maximum pressure campaign to encourage the regime to transition to democracy. The American support is important, but we must be clear it's the Cuban people themselves who are leading this fight. As long as they have hope for a better future for Cuba, my colleagues and I stand ready to help them make it a reality, and thank you.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Thank you for being here with us. And now I would like to acknowledge Congressman Lee Zeldin from the state of New York.
Thank you. Lee Zeldin from the 1st Congressional District of New York. I view this not as a Cuban issue. This is just as much an American issue. And we might not be aligned with the Castro regime, far from it, but we can strengthen our alliance with the Cuban people. They're fighting for freedom. They're fighting for liberty. One of our instruments of national power here in our country is information. We often hear about military and diplomatic and economic pressure, but we have an ability to provide internet, to allow communication, to help the Cuban people achieve freedom and achieve liberty. I certainly don't want to ever see what we're witnessing in Cuba grow here in the United States. We're seeing the ills, the evils of socialism, the economic oppression, the lack of opportunity, the substandard housing, the substandard health care. None of that has any place in our country, and for our allies, the Cuban people, for their families who are here in the United States, we have a duty and an obligation to speak up, to step up, and to help ensure that the Cuban people are able to achieve that freedom. I'd like to thank Maria Salazar and Mario and Carlos and the senators who are here. They are on the front lines of this fight in their home districts in South Florida. And they are pouring their heart and souls into this effort. And for any of their constituents who are watching this live stream, I will tell you as a representative from New York that I have heard Maria and Mario and Carlos passionately advocating for this cause every moment, every opportunity here in Washington, D.C. And on behalf of my constituents and fellow New Yorkers who care about this issue deeply, we owe a debt to Maria, Mario, and Carlos for what they're doing here in our nation's capital, and it's an honor to stand here with them.
It's an honor to stand with you, and thank you very much for being in this press conference. And now I would like to introduce and give an opportunity to one of the shining stars of the Florida congressional delegation, Kat Kamek.
Thank you, Maria, and thank you to all my colleagues for being here today. Not just as a representative from the Sunshine State, a state which is home to more than 60% of the Cuban American population in America today. But as an American, a freedom-loving American, I have a simple message. To the Biden administration, freedom is not a la carte. You cannot condemn the actions of one dictator and then turn your cheek when it's 90 miles in your backyard. We have an obligation to stand with the people of Cuba as they fight for freedom, as they fight for the basic human rights that they have been denied for 62 years. This issue of the lack of engagement, the lack of internet, the lack of basic options and assistance from this administration, it's embarrassing. It is horrific. And this administration continues indirectly to support a regime that has denied the rights of so many. As, again, someone who represents a state that is home to over 60% of the Cuban population, as well as for those Cuban Americans that serve right alongside me, both in Congress and in our office, I want you to know we are with you. We stand with you. And if this administration chooses not to take action, not to condemn the actions of this regime, I know my colleagues and I will continue to fight in working with the private sector to deliver the very basic needs in order to bring freedom and liberty to the island. Patria y vida.
Thank you, Kat. And finally, I would like to welcome Representative Michelle Steele, and she is with us not only in spirit, but she knows very well what we're talking about because she's fighting it. Her family fought it, and she is an eyewitness of what we want for not only for Cuba, but for the rest of the hemisphere. Michelle Steele from the state of California.
Thank you very much, and thank you all the colleagues that's standing up for Cuban people. The United States is a beacon of freedom and democracy around the world, and we must stand united against communist regimes. My parents fled from North Korea and the country's communist rule and saw the devastating impact of communism firsthand. My family knows what it was like to wait in lines for necessities. That is not how people deserve to live, and it's how the people of Cuba are forced to live every day under communist rule. The Cuban people are protesting a decades-long communist regime that has repressed millions. When I see what is happening in Cuba, I am reminded again why America is the greatest country on earth. In this country, a first-generation Korean American can build an American dream here and become a congresswoman. In our country, we respect and value our freedom of speech and expression. This country and this administration must stand up for those values, and I'm proud to stand in support of the Cuban people. And thank you.
Well, thanks to all of you. Thank you for attending this press conference. If you need any extra bites, we're going to be staying a couple of more minutes in Spanish. If you need any other Spanish bites, we're here to thank you very much. And Cuba, libre, patria y vida. Thanks again.